Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Melly, and I'm here with my co host, Maggie. This is another episode of Celestial Curiosities, and this is episode 3 of, or class 3, or lecture 3, whatever, of Celestial Essentials, where we're going to be talking about planets and celestial bodies, if you will. Celestial Essentials is taking you through an 8-class series where we are focusing on all of the basics you need to get yourself right with reading an astrology chart. Maggie, what's the deal? The highlights of the Celestial Essentials course.
I'm so glad you asked. The Celestial Essentials is for you if you have been wanting to learn astrology, want a little structure with learning astrology. This would be a really good place for you to be. There are lectures, there are live courses, and we are going to make you practice. We've got a curriculum, we've got worksheets, we've got all this stuff. So you are going to learn astrology. This is great for you also. If you just want to understand yourself a little bit better, if you want to have a better understanding for the people in your life, your significant others, your coworkers, your children, your friends, you're going to learn so much about all of that in this course. And we're so excited to have you.
Yes. So we are building this curriculum as we are recording these episodes, and it's really powerful to see it come together. I'm stoked beyond. It's not just that there's going to be a workbook and there's going to be live classes. It's going to be live classes with us that we're hosting each week for 9 weeks. And the workbook and the worksheets and whatever all else is all completely designed by us to align with this curriculum. You know, there are these moments where you're like, oh, there's already so many courses out there. There's literally, and so many that we've taken. Astrology University. Maggie is a student of Deborah Silverman's. I'm a student of Stephen Forrest. And there's a million different ways that you can do this. But Maggie and I have just learned over the last few years that this brings us so much joy to do the teaching. And that, I don't know, I think that as every astrologer goes through their journey, and this is probably true in really most industries, you just build your own flavor. You build your own kind of, oh, but I've heard it all these different ways, but it makes the most sense to me this way. And so Maggie and I being aligned on all of that, just creating this is honestly like I'm actually getting goosebumps while I'm talking, which is always the best. The best. But there's this joy, this genuine joy in the creation of this, which is how you know you're, on the right path. So anyway, there will be live weekly meetings for 9 weeks. We'll be announcing all of the details very soon. You will also have included in that a membership to Luna Astrology, our wonderful sponsors and astrology software that we use. Drop into the show notes, click on the link to be added to the waitlist. We've been getting the question, if I'm already on your list, should I still sign up? The answer is yes, because we are going to be releasing to those of you who express interest through this waitlist. We're going to be launching early bird pricing and first seats available to you. So even if you're on our main email list, make sure that you drop your email into this link as well so that we can get to you first.
I'm so excited for people to play with Luna. That's going to be another really big part of this. You'll have your membership for a whole year, so you'll be able to use this software. It has great teaching capabilities. That there are things you can click on that will provide descriptions so that you can learn and get inspiration from. But we're also going to show you the copious ways that you can use it, the ephemeris, the tracking transits. It is so comprehensive and it is so useful that it is easy to kind of blow by all of the different features that it has. So as a part of this training, you're going to get hands-on experience with Luna and understand how to use it going into your practice going forward, or just bringing it into your astrological studies. So we're really excited about that. Thank you so much, Luna. We love you. You are so beautiful and efficient. And again, just features that neither one of us have found anywhere else.
I never get tired of saying that. It's just beautiful. It just is so funny. Yes. So we love Luna. That's included all that wonderful stuff. And what is going to be included in today's episode? Let me let you know, and then we're going to dive right in. So today we're covering the planets. I kind of wanted to call this episode Celestial Bodies, but that sounds like a little too woo-woo for no reason. I mean, they're planets. We know them as planets. We learned them when we were in first grade or whatever. And yes, it's the planets, but also really they're celestial bodies because the sun and the moon are really kind of categorized under planets, even though technically they're not planets. We're going to be going through each of the planets. How many times can I say planets in 30 seconds?
At least 5 more.
I mean, it's like when you say a word too many, you're like, this isn't a real word. You see it too many times. It's not. Anyway, cycles, their cycles, the meanings, what they represent, and how they're used. We're going to go through all of that. We're also going to go through the terms that are most important to know when we're working with planets, things like retrograde, transit, etc. So all of that. And I'm going to let Maggie kick it off with some sort of like planetary basics and overviews. And then we're actually going to go through every single one. And it's going to be great. So let's go, Maggie. What do we got to know about the basics of the planets?
Well, I love to think of the planets like the board of directors. If you've seen the movie Inside Out with, joy and sadness and anger, how those characters are kind of pulling the strings on the little girl, Riley, who's the main character. I think of our planets in the exact same way. Each planet has different qualities and characteristics and themes that it's responsible for. So when we look to see what was going on with the planets when we were born, we get clues about the characters that are controlling everything, not controlling everything, but influencing everything.
They're each responsible for something within our psyche and also something within the collective energy. And we touched upon that in the first episode when we were talking about just the chart. The planet is the what. So this is how that sort of presents. You are going to find the planets in your natal chart, right? The moment that you were born. And you're also going to find them in transits, meaning every single minute of every single day, they're always moving, they're always somewhere. So there are multiple different kinds of charts that you can pull up, but the planets we don't have anything to read if we don't have the planets. So this is where you'll find them. A part of bringing that up is that the word transit, when that's used, which is quite frequently, it's important to know that that's always referring to a planet. A planet is transiting into a house. A planet is transiting out of a house. A planet is transiting over another planet. It's in this zodiac sign. All those, know that if you hear the word transit, we're talking about a planet. All planets go retrograde. The sun and the moon do not go retrograde. Again, for simplicity's sake, the sun and the moon are typically just categorized under planet, but they are celestial bodies that do not go retrograde. So again, though, to mention that when you hear the word retrograde, it's always referring to a planet. So anyway,
so you're telling me that Pisces can't go retrograde?
Pisces cannot. Yeah. It's so funny. Like the things that you notice when you know things, obviously, and people say some ridiculous things sometimes. And I'm just like, that's not quite how that works. The amount of times that I've heard somebody be like, oh, so I heard something like Aries is going retrograde. I'm like, yeah, Aries can't go retrograde. So just to get some basics out of the way that I think are important terms to keep in mind that are related to the planets. And because we mentioned retrograde, we'll also mention direct, which is the opposite of retrograde. So the majority of the time, your planets are moving direct. But when they go retrograde, that's when you'll start to hear, oh, Mercury's retrograde and it's going to station direct on such and such day. Again, we don't want to get too detailed right now, but I think that knowing the lingo is important. So anyway, I think that's all the basics and overview. Yeah. All right, let's get into the planets and the celestial bodies. So we're going to start with the sun. And the sun moves 1 degree per day. And Maggie's going to pull up a chart for us to get to know the glyphs as we go. And yeah, be looking at the chart always. So isolate that sun real quick for me as much as you can. One cool thing about Luna, I'll throw out there, is when you can isolate a certain planet as much as possible, but it's going to isolate it only insofar as what's related to it. So what's cool about this is that here you isolate the sun and you see that it's got relationships with other planets. That's for a later class, but I just figure mentioning that's why that's the closest we can get to it. But go ahead and zoom in again. The sun is this circle. Actually, that's even great. Yeah, go ahead and even click on that again. It's a circle with the circle in the middle. And then up here you see it. And quick Luna moment. we love our little Luna moments. What Maggie's just done is, I believe we've shown this before, but this is called a data card. And when you double click on any planet in the chart, it will pull up the basic information about it. And my favorite part of this that can take any beginner, make them sound like they know what they're talking about, is you can open up the definition of the sun, which here is described as the giver of life. All these things that we're going to tell you about each and every single planet, you can also find here that will help you with your memorization. And here it's telling you that in this particular chart, the sun is in Aries. And in this particular chart, we are looking at the time right now, today, this active moment in time. The sun is in Aries. So it's going to explain what the sun in Aries feels like, what that Aries energy is, behaviors and characteristics, and go up a little bit. I think it said motivation or path to highest expression, motivation and needs. So it has this for every single one when you click on any of the planets, which is wild. And then here it's also showing you in this data card what house it's in, which is helpful to know more so in a natal chart than it is at this current moment, because that's going to keep moving. But anyway. Okay, so come out of there. What we really wanted to make sure you saw on this, and we'll show you for each and every single one, is the glyph. So circle with a dot in the middle is the sun. And the sun, as I said, moves 1 degree per day. So if you zoom back out, Maggie, that's 365 days in a year. There's 365 days in, or 360 degrees in a circle. So you've got that 5-degree swing. And we can get into all sorts of theories as to why that is. Regardless, though, pretty darn close. Not by accident. And everything is moving around the sun. There is this heliocentric view. I said that correctly, right? That's a heliocentric view versus a geocentric view.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so smart sometimes. I'm so not other times. But what does the sun represent? The sun represents our essence, personality, character, ego. These are some of the main words. And like this said here, it's the giver of life. So I always say that if we took every other planet out of the sky, the only thing we had left was the sun. The sun gives us life. So very, very important piece of the puzzle of the planet. Very important seat on the board of directors. Might we call this the chair? This is the chair of the board of directors. To mention a couple of other things that are important to note, the sun rules Leo. So each planet rules 1 or 2 signs. The sun rules Leo. Very appropriate, being that Leo is our, now that you've had your modes and elements class, Leo is your fixed fire sign, lives in the heat of the summer here in the Northern Hemisphere, at least. And so the sun rules Leo. The way that you utilize the sun's energy in a natal chart versus, let's say, a transit chart, like right now, we know that the sun is in Aries, so we're in Aries season. So this is a time where I think it just bears mentioning, because I just said the Northern Hemisphere thing, blanket statement. We are generally speaking about the Northern Hemisphere because that's where we live and that's what we know. However, we got this question on Instagram yesterday, and I think it's worth mentioning because somebody in the Southern Hemisphere asked, so how does this Aries energy apply to us? If you're talking about, oh, the sun is getting warmer and all these things, it's not true over there. It's worth mentioning, I think, that these are always invitations for you to look at internally and externally. So if the seasonal example that's given by an astrologer or whatever doesn't align with where you are, then what's most important anyway is you. And so how can you apply that internally? If we're talking about courage and bravery and action and motivation, how are those things in your internal landscape? And how can you apply those Aryan archetypes to self? Externally, I think that there's always a way that you can still, maybe it doesn't relate to the fire burning or the light getting brighter, but it's still something that you can relate to how you energetically approach the external world too. So just to mention, because I feel like it was timely and interesting to mention during this time, and also because we feel like we need to explain Southern versus Northern, which we're not actually always going to do. So I just wanted to mention that. Anyway, that's really the basics of the sun. I don't think we need to go any deeper there. We all know what the sun feels like. It's warm. It literally helps things grow. It is the giver of life. The end.
The end. That's a nice story.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Feel free to add anything you'd like before you move on to our next celestial body.
I think you covered everything.
Superb.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're going to move into the counterpart of the sun, the kind of opposite character, which is the moon. I'm going to come over here and look for the symbol, the glyph that looks like a moon. That makes it pretty easy. The moon rules Cancer. That is the sign it is connected to, mother, home, all of that kind of like internally nurturing type stuff. This is the opposite of our outer expression. So it's more connected to our inner world, our subconscious, our emotional nature, how you prefer to be cared for, and how you kind of just naturally show up as a caring person to your loved ones. And I always think it's interesting to note that the shape of the moon changes every day, or when you look up at the night sky, it gets either smaller or bigger. And likewise, our internal landscape, our emotional landscape is often shifting on a daily basis. So the moon changes signs about every 2.5 days. And its full cycle around through each zodiac sign is 28 days. Just interesting. Women have 28-day menstrual cycles. We're on, like, that's how our hormones operate, is over a broader window of time. And men are a 24-hour cycle, and it's corresponding with the sun. So I just think that's a cool thing. And yeah, super neat. That's kind of the gateway drug to getting into astrology is the moon signs and letting yourself feel what the cosmos is kind of beaming down on us.
Yeah, I love that. Will you zoom in too, just so we can have a closer, that crescent moon right there, just so you don't squint at the screen and you can see it good. And I'm just not gonna get too complex in here, but Jupiter conjunct the moon today. We got yummy Cancer vibes in the air. I love it. Awesome.
This is my natal moon and Jupiter are conjunct in Libra, so it's squaring where the moon was when I was born. Both of them. Isn't that funny?
That is funny. How do you feel today?
I feel inflated in a good way.
I love that. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Now on to one of my favorite planets. We're going to do, so all of I don't think we actually said this out loud. These first planets that we're going through are called affectionately the personal planets because they are closest to Earth. So we're moving outward in the same order. I don't remember what the elementary school thing was. It was like my somebody something to try to, do you remember that? It was like my very something. I don't remember, a mnemonic device or whatever those are called. I remember that shit, but we did learn that at some point so that you knew the order that they were going out, how far they were. We are going in that same order. And as much as the astronomical literal placement matters for how this works psychologically for when we are interpreting a natal chart, the planets that are closest to us are called the personal planets because they tend to impact us more, our psychology and the way that we present. So Mercury, I'm very mercurial. So I love Mercury, one of my favorite planets. Maggie's pointing it out right there. Go ahead and do a quick click on it so we can see if we get it a little bit more. Yep. This little guy looks like a little alien with his 2 little antenna and the cross at the bottom. So Mercury rules 2 signs. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. It has an 88-day orbit around the sun. So it spends just about a week per sign. Now, Mercury does go retrograde 3 to 4 times a year. So there are times where it's going to spend longer in a certain sign because of that. Mercury represents communication, the mind, understanding, perception, articulation, language, information, connection. So as we go through, we're going to be sharing keywords for each of these. And some of these lists, it's actually very helpful for me to hear them time and time again, because I'll be like, oh my God, I totally forgot about using the word language, which seems silly because understanding and mind and all those things, hello, they all utilize language. but it's so helpful because certain of these keywords will really stand out to you and help you remember the essence. I mean, at any given time, I can give you with no problem 5 words that are keywords that go with any planet. But the deeper you can get there, also the more layered, the more nuanced the conversation gets. So how you think and how you communicate is how this presents in a natal chart. So we have these, Maggie and I like to call these party tricks that as you grow in your astrological knowledge, it's things that you can call upon really quickly that you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. And it's kind of fun to play with too. So something to know about Mercury is that it is the closest to the sun and it's never farther than 28 degrees away from the sun. So we'll use zoom out real quick so we can verify. So as you can see here, Mercury is at the top there in Pisces at 10 degrees. And then we know that we only have to scan the sky a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right, this chart, to figure out where's the sun. And in this case, the sun is in Aries. So right now, a baby is being born somewhere and they are being born sun in Aries and their Mercury is going to be in Pisces. If you want to know what that feels like, just go listen to our first 50 episodes. Because our third co-host, Lisa, Sun Aries, which actually shout out, today is her birthday at the moment of this recording. And she's got Mercury in Pisces. I, in contrast, am a Sun Aries with Mercury conjunct, very close in Aries. The way that Lisa and I present essentially our sun, you can see some similarities. You can see the Aries archetype. But the way that we communicate could not be more different. And that is the power of seeing the difference between the sun and the Mercury. Now, why it's a party trick is because if you know this, then that means it can never be more than 1 sign away from the sun. So you could simply just ask somebody, hey, when's your birthday? And, they tell you July 27th. And you're like, okay, great. Well, they're a Leo sun. And then as you're listening to them, you're like, okay, they're like super Leo. So their Mercury's probably in Leo too. Or I know that flanking Leo are Cancer and Virgo. And as I'm hearing them speak, they're really precise. But maybe that Mercury's in Virgo. Or you start to just play. If this is all Maggie and I could do all day long, it's all we would do. Just guess archetypes everywhere. Because you see it, once you know it, you start to see it everywhere. So this is just kind of a fun trick that you can use as a game for yourself, but also as you get better and better. I hate when people ask me, what do you think my sign is? It's really not fun, but this is because there's just too many. It's too layered, but there are ways that you can kind of be like, oh, well, and then guess and see. And if you were right.
That's so fun.
Isn't that fun? Yeah, it's such a good party trick. So as far as myths are concerned, a lot of different names that Mercury goes by are Hermes, Loki, Thoth, or Toth. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that. And Anubis, which are all names that I've heard in movies or, old mythological stories or whatever it is. A lot of these date back right to Mesopotamian times, Egyptian, Sumerian, Greek, Rome. So we're going to throw some of these names out there where you see like, oh, wow, this is not just simply Mercury or Hermes. These stories span across so much and so much space and time. And lastly, to say about this that I think is mentioned in quite a few of our episodes. I know we got into it in the Mercury retrograde episode, especially. Hermes or Mercury was the only god that could move between the overworld and the underworld. So the only reason that gods above and gods below were able to communicate at all was because of Mercury. So pretty powerful expression to think about there, and also makes you think about then, your inner world, your outer world, your subconscious, your conscious, and how you navigate those, and how Mercury can be a representation of those things.
I love in the mythology, Mercury or Hermes was such a fast mover. He had winged shoes. He was always zipping around from the overworld to the underworld and everywhere in between. And it's the fastest planet too.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So many, the as above, so below is present all the time.
It's so cute.
Yes. All right, on to next, Venus.
Oh, I am just so happy that I get to talk about Venus today. All right. So Venus rules Taurus and Libra. So it's got two signs that it's responsible for. It has a 225-day orbit and it spends about 19 days in each sign. Venus goes retrograde once every 2 years. It's not a yearly cycle or multiple times a year like Mercury is, or we'll get into some of the other retrograding planets, but she goes retrograde for 40 days and 40 nights, which corresponds with lots of different mythologies across time. Venus is the counterpart to Mars, just different ends of the same spectrum. Venus has more to do with attraction and desire. When I was in astrology school, they said, if you drop someone off at the mall, if you know where their Venus is, you'd probably be able to guess what they gravitate towards. And it's a very different kind of attraction or desire than going out and fighting for what you believe in. It's softer. It's like, come to me. Just like Venus, the goddess, so many cool stories about her, but she was a goddess and she got everything she ever desired without even lifting her tiniest finger. And that is what the feminine archetype does. It attracts things to it. It's more magnetic. It doesn't show up quite like Mars, where there's some aggression and some courage. It's just come to me, come to me. So Venus is associated with love, with relationships, with flow, with harmony, with the feminine energy. Love and money is another thing she's connected with. And she is the third brightest object in the sky. And if in I think the first episode where I get into a little bit more of the history of astrology, that was one of the first texts was about Venus. And it makes sense because she's so beautiful. She stands out so much. Another cool thing, last thing, is that she, throughout her cycle, will sometimes be the morning star and will sometimes be the evening star. So if you go outside and you see a really bright star at morning or evening, it could very well be Venus.
Cool. Love that. All right. So moving on to, did you show?
I didn't even show now.
No, you were too excited. That's okay. That's Venus right there. So that symbol is very recognizable because it's on like not every, but it's on many restroom signs because it's used as that representation for a female.
Yes.
So while you're zoomed in on the chart there, let's go to Mars next because that's what I'm moving on to. And another symbol that most people are probably familiar with simply because, again, it's used as a masculine symbol in somewhat everyday life. I think it's ubiquitous enough. And Mars rules Aries. It has a 687-day cycle, which means that it spends about it spends 57 days per sign, but that's about 2 months. So again, a sort of party trick, and why I think it's helpful to know how long these planets, especially the personal ones, spend in each sign is because I'm going to use the example of me. I don't use astrology on the daily basis. I mean, I do use it on a daily basis, but I don't use it personally on a daily basis. I'm not always aware what planet is exactly where and how that's impacting me. Like Maggie, I don't know if you knew that Jupiter and Jupiter and the moon were conjunct today and squaring your Jupiter and moon. I don't know if you looked at the chart yet, if you happened to know that. And I don't always know where the planets are in relation to me or whatever. However, I am a human being who lives my normal life. And sometimes I'm just like scrolling through Instagram and, some astrology account is like, today Mars enters Pisces or whatever it is. And it just gives me this like, and if I know that Mars spends 2 months per sign, it just kind of gives me this moment of, okay, cool. So Mars just entered Pisces and it's going to be there for 2 months. And so how's that going to affect me? Or how do I want to utilize that in my life? What practices spiritually, thinking of Pisces, do I want to move forward with or whatever it is? So just another little party trick of why we're not just mentioning this so that you have these random things that you can know, but are you ever going to use? These are really practical things to know, the cycles. And as we go farther and farther, and especially this year, as of when this was recorded, it's 11/11. As of when this was recorded in 2026, We have so many major planetary movements happening into new signs, Neptune, Uranus, etc., that I think it's a little bit more in the forefront right now, that people are like, oh, wow, okay, good to know all these big shifts that are happening. And the personal ones can be just as important because they do impact you personally more so, and you can be more strategic in how you use them, is what I think. Speaking of strategic is one of my keywords for Mars, because Mars is all about action, creation, motivation, impulsivity, right? It's the masculine. So there's also anger and frustration in there as well. But it's about like achievement, survival instinct, assertion, directness, courage. A lot of words that go with this one, passion. And when I think about all of that mixed with the archetypal god of war, Mars is the god of war, and in all sorts of myths along different cultures, gods and goddesses of war always fall under this sort of Martian archetype. A god of war does not go into battle without strategy. So all those things I just mentioned, this achievement and this assertion and motivation and drive, it's all those things, but it's about moving forward in a strategic way. When you think of this 2-year cycle, right? I just said it takes about, so it spends 2 months per sign, 687 days total for its movement. So it spends around, takes about 2 years to go all the way around. Well, what is happening when you're 2 years old? You've reached your terrible twos, as they say. And that was one of those things that always reminded me of Mars energy, or helped me to understand Mars energy in a way that I was like, right? Because what is happening at the terrible twos? The kids are losing their shit. They're just learning what their emotions feel like. They don't know what to do with that. And so it just expresses, and it expresses in sometimes anger, and sometimes it's not controllable at that age. They don't know yet. However, and I will say this as being a very strong Mars archetype, me personally, there's this wisdom in learning how to control the Mars energy rather than assert it, because you can assert it and that's great. And that's only going to land good maybe half the time because it's a lot. So everybody has Mars, and their Mars is going to present in a certain way. Can you learn to control and strategically use that energy versus just letting it run free and run wild? I think that that's some of the biggest wisdom when it comes to Mars. Some of the archetypes that are related to Mars are the warrior, the soldier, obviously with war, the action man, the lover. This is also passion and desire. Venus is more on the desire side, but there's this passionate side from Mars. The dancer, the athlete, the winner, all of these. And something that we mentioned, I think Maggie was the one who first taught me this, and I love it, is you can think of this as what gets you up in the morning. What are you motivated by? You get up and just let's go, right? Like I got up this morning so jazzed to be organizing my notes and getting ready for this episode. I was really driven toward this. That was my Mars in action there. And lastly, I'll just say that traditional astrology has titles that it has assigned to some planets, not all. I mean, actually, there are for all, but there are certain words that you'll start to hear sometimes as you're reading astrology articles or listening to podcasts or whatever. And Mars is known as the lesser benefic. So benefic is kind of like one of those old school words, but benefic, beneficial, right? That same etymology at the prefix of the word there is that there's something good about this planet. I tend to stray away from this kind of language because I don't think that any planet is good nor bad. I don't think that their energy is good or bad, right or wrong. I think that they can be used in different ways. But I think it bears mentioning because it took me a long time. I would hear things like that and be like, wait, what? Which planet's that? So the lesser benefic versus you'll learn who the greater benefic is here in a few planets is a representation of how Mars is described sometimes. I want to say one more thing. As I was talking, I realized that I was talking about Mars doing its 2-year cycle, and I almost said Mars return when it's returning. And that was a term that we didn't say at the beginning that probably should have, because when you hear about returns, my Saturn return, Mars return, we're talking about the time that it took for the planet to get right back to where it was the moment that you were born when we're speaking about a person, which most of the time we are when we say those things. So another term that's important to know when it comes to planets. I think that's it for Mars. I was excited about Mars. Could you tell?
I love Mars. And it does make me think of you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
So the next planet, we're getting into a different kind of category, if you will. Jupiter and Saturn are also known as the transpersonal planets. They do not move quite as quickly as the personal planets do. So they just have their own little group. And again, I like to consider them counterparts. They both have such important lessons, very opposite from one another. Jupiter has a 12-year orbit. So it is spending roughly 1 year in each sign, and it is the ruler of Sagittarius. This planet is associated with fun energies like abundance and growth, generosity, optimism. I think of Oprah or Santa Claus when I think of this energy. Like Oprah is always, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. That's very Jupiterian. Santa Claus is the same way, very generous. What does he do? He stays up all night to deliver gifts to everyone all over the world. That's wild. Some might say that's an overindulgence. And Jupiter can get into this territory of overindulgence, over generous, over estimating how much time, resource, etc., that you actually have, but you're just offering it out to everyone. We can see where this is really a fun, nice, good feeling energy, but it can also kind of be a drain on us if we are constantly doing the excess or being overinflated or blind faith. That's one of the other kind of keywords with this energy. This gives clues about the areas in your life that might bring you joy or good fortune or just optimism that makes you feel good. And what do you do when you feel good? We tend to spread that around. So Melly told me this morning that Jupiter, the symbol for Jupiter, is the inversion of Saturn. I had no idea. They're just flip-flopped. When Jupiter's up and Saturn's down. And maybe we'll see why when Melly tells us a little bit more about Saturn.
Perfect. So Maggie's got it here, just zoomed in on Jupiter for a moment so that you can get associated with that. And the other one that she had just gone up to, obviously, with Saturn, they're not perfectly inverted. I'm still not totally clear. I thought it was interesting to read that, but I would need to read more. Actually, I guess now I'm kind of seeing it, but I'm going to stop trying to see that. But I always, for some reason, not for some reason, I mean, I do think it looks like the number 4. It actually almost looks like a 2 and a 4 had a baby, and the 2 morphed into the 4. But yeah, whenever I see it, I always think of the number 4. And that is Jupiter. Also, just to mention with the transpersonal planets, just this Jupiter and Saturn, I also like to think of them as a bridge between the personal and the outer generational planets, which we'll get into next. All right. So now Saturn, if you can scooch on over to Saturn up at the top of the chart in this particular chart of today, we see that Saturn, which kind of looks like the number 5 to me. Weird. And weird that Saturn is at 4 degrees and the sun is at 5. So we're just talking about 4 and 2, and Neptune's at 2. And we're just talking about 2, 4.
Wow.
What? Anyway, so Saturn looks like the number 5 to me. And Saturn is the ruler of Capricorn, has a 29-year orbit, arguably the orbit that I think the majority of the population would know, because I think that Saturn return is one of the most popular things that brings people to astrology. And that happens right around 30 years old. Technically, because of retrogrades and stuff, it kind of happens, I believe, between 27 and a half and 29. So that orbit can shift slightly, but it has a 29-year orbit. It takes 29 years for it to get back to where it was, to have your return. And therefore, it spends about 2.5 years per sign. So this is a great example, again, like I used with Mars, is we can see that Saturn's at 4 degrees of Aries. So it recently entered, and it's going to have some retrogrades while it's in there. Saturn goes retrograde approximately every year or so. For 4.5 months, it stays retrograde. I don't think we mentioned it for Jupiter. I'll just say Jupiter approximately about every year. They're very similar. They're a little bit off, but let's just say on average, it's roughly every year they go retrograde for 4-ish months. So at some point we'll talk more about retrogrades and how to utilize those in your life, because I think they're incredibly powerful. In fact, this year I've learned that more than ever before. But just to note that Saturn is spending 2.5 years in Aries. So if I see that it's at 4 degrees, I know that it just recently entered. So I know that I've got the next 2.5 years of this Saturn energy. And there are ways to utilize that. And the longer that a planet stays in a sign, which means that in your particular natal chart, it's sitting in a specific house, and based on your placements, it's impacting you in different ways. You get to strategize around that. And let me tell you that another planet that really loves strategy besides Mars is Saturn. Saturn is all about structure, discipline, order. It likes to see things done in just the right way. It's also about constraint, limitations, security. Karma actually falls under the umbrella of Saturn as well. It's about material things, time, facts, tangible things that we can kind of tactile, touch, feel. And it's a really like, I often think of him as the principal, as the disciplinarian. When I'm talking about Saturn energy in someone's chart, I might say, like, imagine being called into the principal's office. This is like Saturn coming to teach you something, to teach you a lesson, to make sure that you're on track. It's kind of father-like energy, sometimes referred to as grandfather time also. So Saturn's here to make sure that you understand consequences and responsibility, and that the lessons that you're here to learn, that your soul has come here to learn, that you learn them. And the placement where you find it is going to be, again, this is the what, right? This is going to be then speaking to what are you here to learn? What are the lessons? And that's like the layered unpacking that we do. But wherever we find Saturn, we're going to find this mixed energy of order and all these things. And at the same time, it can be frustrating to kind of be put in a constrained, a box, an order, a path, especially depending on your other archetypes. Where's your Mars? Like if your Mars wants to run free, or if you're very fiery, and then you've got this Saturn, it's interesting to start playing with, okay, well, how is it that I utilize this energy in my life? And again, Saturn is not always it's not always a fun energy. It is a necessary energy, basically. It is also the furthest planet that can be seen with the naked eye. So it formerly was the boundary or the limit of the zodiac. So we talk about limitations. Boundary is another word that we use. If somebody has a very strong Saturn influence in their chart, you'll find that they're probably the type of person who doesn't have trouble setting boundaries, saying no, doing, just doing the thing the way that the thing is meant to be done. Very responsible. And the Saturn is known as the greater malefic, so opposite of benefic. And Maggie forgot to tell you that Jupiter is the greater benefic. I lied to you when I said it was going to take a few planets. It was the next planet. Mars is the lesser benefic, Jupiter is the greater. And then Saturn is the greater malefic. So this is, again, kind of plays into that right or wrong, good or bad, which we don't love, but it does give you a flavor. It's just doesn't feel as easy of a planet to dance with.
I feel like a lot of us spend a lot of time avoiding our Saturn lessons, our Saturn initiations. And I think life would be better if we just embrace them and we're like, all right, I'm going to do the thing.
Yeah. In research for this episode, I found an astrologer in the UK named Jessica Davidson, who I kind of feel like maybe I knew of her before, but I got to give her a shout out because there were she's a writer and an astrologer and a mystic, I think, are her 3 things that she lists herself as. She's a great writer though. And so there were some quotes that just stood out to me that I really liked and definitely want to give her credit for. This one's, speaking of Saturn, was that Saturn governs the timing of the individuation process. I think that's really beautiful because especially when we look at that Saturn return, it is coming to teach us lessons that on our path we are meant to evolve into. Evolution and, like I said, karma are often attributed to Saturn as well. And with that timing, it's like, okay, so when you reach that 29, that 30, we want to maybe call it a quarter life crisis or whatever. This is a major bit of your individuation process of figuring out who you are. So it's so much deeper than just having a crisis unfold and have these lessons that you don't want to learn or that you haven't been paying attention to, like Maggie said, right? So yeah, I like that. Governs the timing of the individuation process. And lastly, from a mythological standpoint, some of the names that might sound familiar: Kronos, which is a Greek titan, is the earth and fertility god, or not names, that's the one name. Castrated his father and ate his children. I remember us talking about this on the original Saturn episode, so go back and listen to that if you want the full scoop. But again, I just felt like that gave you one more scoop of sort of the heaviness, the kind of serious energy that Saturn can bring to the table.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a fun episode. Go listen to Saturn from season 1.
I think, yeah, it wasn't in that episode where I freaked out that I felt like I'd fallen in love with Saturn by the end of the episode.
Yeah, it was a pivotal time.
It was a pivotal moment for me. It's important. All right, awesome. So let's get into the generational planets. First is Uranus. So let's scooch on over to get the glyph while Maggie tells you all about Uranus.
Okay, so Uranus rules Aquarius. It's going to make a lot of sense here in a minute. It has an orbit of 84 years. So it'll take 84 years to go through every sign of the zodiac, spending about 7 years in each sign. This planet was discovered in 1781. So this is several years removed from our ancient Greeks, our ancient Mesopotamians, that were initially charting astrology. This planet has everything to do with innovation, destabilization, revolutionary energy, chaos, change, liberation, freedom, breakthroughs. And it gives you clues about where in your life and how you might be a rebel or you might be more open to change. So this can be really useful. It took me a while to be comfortable talking about the outer planets because they do cover broader windows of time. So this is a little bit more like groups of people or chunks of people, like the millennials and the Gen Alpha and what I don't know all the names for all the groups of people, but those people have more often than not something in common. So we can hearken that back to Uranus, to Neptune, to Pluto. We'll get more through those in a minute. For characters, I think of Robin Williams in Flubber. I think of Dick Van Dyke in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I think of Belle's father in Beauty and the Beast. All three of those characters were inventors. They took what is in place and they wanted to make a change. In order to do that, you have to hold strong on the new path. We can't just fall back into what's familiar, what has worked. You have to be willing to kind of destabilize the foundation in order to bring something new forth. That can be really threatening to people. People like cohesion, they like predictability, they like when everyone's on the same page. So when Belle's father comes in and says, I have a new way, I have a new system, the townspeople were threatened. They're like, why would you mess with a system that's already so freaking good? Martin Luther King Jr. was someone that did this in real life, that saw a system and was like, we need to take it back to the drawing board. We need to scrap this and start over. This is all connected to Uranus. We must be able to hold the new path forward. This also, just one more thing, Uranus has an odd orbit compared to all the other planets. And you need to be able to do the odd thing if you're going to bring about a new future. It rotates on its side. So its poles are horizontal to the sun, whereas all the other planets, it's the equator that's horizontal to the sun. So it's literally up there just doing its own thing. And it's asking you to do the same.
Hell yeah. I love that. So I had this teacher who would say Uranus instead of Uranus. And I thought, is she just trying to say things differently? She's trying to be unique. And then I've heard other astrologers say the same. And turns out that Uranus is named after Uranus, the Greek god of the heavens, who's Gaia's brother. So together they created sky and earth, which I thought was really cool. And lastly, I usually, when I'm talking about the energy of Uranus, I talk about him being the god of thunderbolts and lightning, which arguably Jupiter kind of brings in a similar energy. I've heard him also talked about as thunderbolts, not maybe as much as lightning. But regardless, the name Uranus means rainmaker. So it's associated with thunder, rain, and lightning. And the kind of destabilizing energy and all the things that Maggie mentioned are exactly what I feel like that god would bring to the table. So I just wanted to mention those few things.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, you shift us over to Pisces on the wheel. I'm sorry, Neptune on the wheel, but Neptune rules Pisces. So there you go. You've got this trident looking symbol that we've been looking at a few times today already when we were looking at the sun and Saturn. That right there is Neptune. So Neptune rules Pisces, and Neptune's orbit is 165 years. So this is double Uranus. Spends 14 years roughly per sign. And as you can see here, same strategy that we used with Saturn, we see that it just entered. It's at 2 degrees. So it's going to be in there for a while. We know we're going to have that Neptune and Aries energy alongside us. Neptune was discovered in 1846, which coincided with romantic movements in literature, art, music, and spiritualism. And some keywords for Neptune are imagination, dreams, fantasy, spirituality, dissolution, confusion, transcendence, creativity, consciousness, and escapism. Neptune rules Pisces. Pisces is a water element, and water dissolves. So Neptune is really good at dissolving boundaries. And one of the main descriptions that I like to think of it is that it dissolves boundaries between consciousness and unconsciousness, or between your conscious and your unconscious, rather. So it merges things and concepts and I think your psyche-scape. I haven't used that new term yet today. Parts of that external, internal, it's boundaryless, right? This idea of I am but a drop in the ocean and you are but a drop in the ocean, and together we are all one. That is a very Neptunian, very Piscean thing. Another quote that I got from Jessica Davidson, which I really liked, she talks a lot about the glyphs, and I didn't bring that in for every single planet. However, she talks a lot about this cross of matter. So I clearly need to do a little bit more research on that. However, I really liked, without even knowing exactly what the cross of matter is or exactly what it represents, I really liked this description, which was that the glyph of Neptune represents the cross of matter between two crescents of soul, where soul can be seen as being crucified on the cross or crucified in matter. It's also Poseidon's trident, which is the symbol of his power. But that was such Neptunian language, two crescents of soul, where soul can be seen as being crucified on the cross. There's like this depth and this almost like tragedy around what Neptune can bring, but there's also just this like soulful beauty. I don't know, I thought that was really nice.
I like that.
The archetypes that are often related to Neptune are the savior, the victim, the martyr, the addict, the suffering artist, the visionary dreamer, and the mystic. And lastly, as far as mythology is concerned, across all, again, cultures, the gods and goddesses that have to do with the sea and with rivers, water, are usually related to Neptune. So that is Neptune for you.
Neptune, Pisces, these characters make me think of mist. I've said that probably 1,000 times already, but mist is just water droplets that have spread out. And that is such a nice picture for this kind of energy.
Yeah, we both said it 1,000 times, and actually I can't believe I didn't say it, but we talk about it a lot in our Frozen 2 episode, which was a lot of fun to do. And that one is about that, when you walk up to a forest that has mist and you can't see through and it's like the foggy, that's Neptune energy right there for sure.
I love that. That's good imagery. Last but not least, I guess it's not but last of our solar system planets, we will talk about Pluto. Pluto is this kind of symbol with the cup and the circle in the cup. It's very far away and it moves very, very slowly. Its cycle is 248 years. So we are coming up. Never mind. I was going to say we're coming up on the Pluto return for the United States of America, but we already did that. That happened. So that is our 248th, 250th birthday, however you like to look at it. As a country, this planet rules Scorpio. This is a newer addition that would be considered the modern ruler. Scorpio used to be ruled by Mars before we could see Pluto. And I forgot to write down when we found that planet. So maybe you can help me multitask.
I can look that up.
Thank you. This planet is connected with some of the deeper, Melly said recently in an episode, the seedy underbelly. This is that kind of wheelhouse, that kind of area in our life. It's connected to death and rebirth, transformation, darkness, power, elimination. Sometimes it's associated with fear. And I think that makes sense because when we cross a threshold into new territory, that can be kind of problematic for our brains and our psyches to feel secure and safe. It's all new. It's all unpredictable territory. So fear it's a part of transformation. It's a part of change and moving from like closing chapters to opening new ones. I think about the movie director when I think about Pluto, he might look kind of unassuming. He walks in the room and the rest of the people kind of modify their behaviors a little bit to be on best behavior. This man can make them or break them. He has a lot of power in the room. We have that same power, whether you think of yourself as the director of your life or not. You have it within you. You are the one that is steering the ship. You are the one that's making the calls. You are the one that chooses to stay the same or to face the uncertainty of change. This also has a lot to do with our subconscious stories and subconscious things that we've collected over the course of our life. So when was this planet discovered?
Exactly February 18th, 1930.
Thank you.
1930. So there's a lot more that you can dive into and so many interesting podcast episodes and things out there that really get into this, again, as above, so below, what was going on Earth when these generational planets in particular were discovered and how what they represent was perfectly appropriate to what was going on here on Earth at that time. And I don't know if you said it, but this is an interesting one too, because of the orbit that it ranges 12 to 30 years per sign. And the retrograde cycle, I'm actually thinking that to really kind of hammer home how you can familiarize yourself with the farther you go, the longer it goes kind of a thing. I might just list these and see if that resonates nicely for people. But for example, with Pluto, every 12 months for 5 to 6 months. So it stays retrograde for longer. Neptune, I didn't mention it, but about every year, it's for about 5 months that it goes retrograde. Uranus is very similar. So, with those two, it's a little bit of an exception, I suppose, since Neptune's cycle is double what Uranus's is. But if you go all the way back to Mercury, who's going retrograde 3 to 4 times a year for 3 weeks at a time, and then Venus every 2 years for that 40 to 44 day cycle. Mars is doing every 2 years roughly for 60 to 80 days. Jupiter is doing about each year for 4 months. Saturn, very similar. And then it keeps going from there. You get to see, okay, the farther that these planets are away, the longer that they take, the longer their retrograde periods too. And you start to understand, oh, okay, while the personal planets are closer to us, and so they might impact us more strongly, the strategy that you're going to use to utilize a short retrograde period or what that looks like for a personal planet is going to be way different than how you're going to strategize how to use this longer term energy. And then to think about also on a collective scale, which is what you hear more for the outer or the generational planets, is how they're impacting the whole world, right? So Just thought I'd mention that
Yeah.
real quick. Was there anything else you wanted to say about Pluto? Did I cut you off? I don't even.
No, no, not at all. Thank you for adding I did mean to say 12 to 30 years per sign, depending on what sign it is. And then just kind of concise, Pluto's placement reveals where and how we will be put through our most transformative experiences. So just to give you an idea of how, using the sign that it's in, we both were born when Pluto is in Scorpio. There will be some type of thread probably between Melly and Mai's transformative experiences over life, and then the house placement where Pluto is in this specific chart. It's in the 9th house. This is a transit chart, so that's not really all that helpful. But if someone was born at this moment, we would get clues about they're going to have unique experiences with Pluto being in Aquarius, and those experiences are going to be more related to 9th house areas of life, which is belief systems, philosophies, higher education, travel, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Cool. Lastly, I think we've said lastly like 3 times. There's so many things I just randomly remember sometimes. In this case, thinking about the returns, obviously you can do some simple math in your mind. You know that we don't get to see a return for every single planet in our lifetime. Uranus is hopefully most people get to see their Uranus return at that 84 years, but nobody alive is going to see, or nobody at our current human stamina is going to see their Neptune return or their Pluto return. So it's also very unique to see when we get into transits and things like that, when you have big Neptune and Pluto transits happening, keeping in mind that like they're very unique to your story. That's not even, somebody may never see Pluto touch their moon or have any major impact on them. Whereas, I'm thinking of a friend of mine right now who I was just talking to her recently, and Pluto's been going over her moon for like 2 years or something. And so very unique. All of us have these extremely unique experiences based on the chart first as the foundation, and then how everything interacts with it. So really cool. All right, let's get into our final 3 celestial bodies that are not planets, but are always found on all astrological charts. So whether you pull up a free chart or you're using Luna, and if you have the default settings set up for whatever it's going to look like, there's one additional glyph that represents an asteroid. And Maggie's going to show you that right now. That's Chiron. It literally looks like the letter K with a 0 under it, or a letter O, whatever. Circle. How about just circle? It's fine. And this is Chiron. Chiron is the wounded healer. Chiron does not rule a sign like all of the rest of the planets, because he is not a planet. However, he was deemed so important that he had to be added to the chart. So we got to talk about him because he's going to be on any default chart that you see. So Chiron's transit takes about 50 years and also has a highly irregular orbit. So it spends anywhere from 1.5 to 2 years, which is the least amount of time in Libra, for example. But then he spends approximately 8 years in Aries. He's actually completing his time in Aries at the moment. And it's not by accident. I don't think that in my practice, at least in the last 2 months, I've had, I want to say 3 different people going through their Chiron return who have been like, I need to have a reading. What's going on? And I'm like, oh, well, and it's interesting because it's been taking so long moving through Aries, how that probably has been building in a way that's not as, probably didn't feel as acute as it might in some other signs. So it's been interesting. I've been reflecting on that quite a bit recently. So Chiron is sorry?
Oh, it just said interesting.
Chiron is the wounded healer. He was wounded multiple times. So his first wounding was that he was a product of rape, and he came out as a centaur and then was immediately shunned by his family because he was half human, half horse. So there's already deep emotional wounds from the very beginning of life. And after he was abandoned, Apollo and his twin sister Artemis raised Chiron, and they taught him all sorts of things about the healing arts, music and archery and hunting. So he was really well positioned to be a teacher, and he was sought out for his tutoring. He ended up helping a lot of people just by way of all the things that he knew and his wisdom that he was getting through life, if you will. Chiron actually means hand or skilled with hands in Greek and is related to surgeon, which is like hand worker. So kind of interesting there. Now, later in life, Chiron was struck by an arrow from Heracles. And despite all of his healing knowledge and everything he knew, he was not able to heal his wound. He was immortal. He was born, I don't remember his dad's name, but he was born immortal. And so he couldn't heal this very painful wound of this arrow that was stuck in him, but he also could not die. So this is really the representation of what Chiron is in our psyche and how it represents psychologically in our stories. It is this wound that is so deep that it's considered like an early wound. It's an emotional, it's not surface level at all. So it's something that we are meant to grapple with in our lifetime. It's something that is kind of, I always think of it as being a sticky, it doesn't go away. And so it's something that you're meant to grow in your own wisdom and evolution by healing that wound, by learning how to, by tending to it. And as you go through that process, you gain wisdom, you do heal a little bit at a time. And as you continue healing, you find a way to then utilize that medicine, that balm, to help others heal, whether that's by way of being a direct healer, right? Everybody's got Chiron, so it's not that everybody turns into some kind of healer, but we all have the capacity through our stories, our experiences, and our learned wisdom to support others. And maybe we choose not to, and that's fine. And maybe also there's certainly many wounded people walking around that are not tending to their wounds, but Chiron is going to show us where that wound shows up in our life. Right here, Chiron in the 11th house in Aries, we're not looking at a person's chart we're looking at right now, but let's just say that we're looking at a person's chart. Well, this is somebody who's going to be wounded. And this is interesting because the 11th house is all about communities and friendships. And then Aries is all about self. So it's going to be probably, we just do a quick synthesis. It's like, well, this is probably somebody who's going to feel really uncomfortable being themselves in community, or is going to feel wounded in spaces with others, maybe difficult to make friends, might bring too much of that Aryan energy and doesn't know how to control it, or there's a lot of different ways it can present. And this is just me thinking of it like right off the cuff, right? There's a lot more that we would look at if we were really looking at it. But that's kind of the overarching and a little bit more detail around what's up with Chiron. And again, one more shout out to Jessica Davidson. She had this poem listed. It's a Rumi poem that I thought was just so perfect that I had never heard before. And I don't know if you've heard it before, Maggie, but it represents all the Chiron energy, basically. Your doctor must have a broken leg to doctor. Your defects are the ways that glory gets manifested. Whoever sees clearly what's diseased in himself begins to gallop on the way. Don't turn your head. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you. So I've heard that that's where the light enters you. I feel like that's been paraphrased, but the whole rest of it really is so perfect for everything Chironic. And you can see, I think, why this is so important that it made its way onto the main chart, because your doctor must have a broken leg to doctor. Your defects are the ways that glory gets manifested. I mean, it's showing you this beauty and paradox of our life of like where the wound is there is magic. There is this healing is going to bring you good things. So I love that.
Oh, I love that too. I think our episode on Chiron was one of my favorite episodes that we did. We get a little bit more into the mythology and just the story of that. If this speaks to you, go listen to that episode because it'll give more thought points for you to explore.
Awesome. All right, let's wrap her up, Maggie. We're going to finish up with the south and north nodes of the moon. These are always opposite each other. So Maggie's showing you right now the north node at the top of the chart, which looks like a horseshoe. And then you've got the opposite horseshoe on the bottom, and that's the south node. So you're always going to find them one opposite the other. And she's going to tell you a little bit about what they're up to and why they're there.
Yes. So the nodes are not, they're not tangible. This is a math equation, basically. It has to do with the ecliptic pattern, the way that the sun and the moon move around each other. So the north node is where the moon moves into the northern ecliptic hemisphere. And then the south node is where the moon enters the southern ecliptic hemispheres. That's hard. That's hard for me to get my head around. I just wanted to say it in case your brain works that way. Math. So these both of these points represent a different direction that we can head in our lives. This has a lot to do with karma. It has a lot to do with our evolution, with our dharma, with, where we started to where we end our lives, the growth that we're able to facilitate. This is the real soul work. When I was in Deborah Silverman's, one of her programs, she said that if you concentrate on the north node, you'll be able to kind of fast track your evolution. I don't really like to think of it like that. It's a good way to say it, but I don't mean it like sleazy and greasy and let's evolve as fast as we can. I don't think that's the solution. But by focusing on this area of life, which is going to be the unfamiliar territory, it's going to be what you haven't been doing, so you don't know what it's like over there. Before I go any further, this is on an 18.6 year cycle, so it will be in Pisces Virgo again in 18.6 years. So if the north node, the horseshoe with the bend pointing upward, is unfamiliar, it's what brings the growth, it is uncharted. So it just takes a little bit more boldness to venture into that. Again, our brain views that unknown as kind of a problem. It's a little bit of a threat. So I think we just have to be intentional. We have to recognize and be aware when we feel maybe afraid of something or something feels unfamiliar and then we want to shy away from it. Sometimes leaning into that thing can be the best possible medicine. So then opposite of that, the other end of the spectrum, the south node often represents familiar territory. So that is just keeping you in the same pattern, the same steps. We're not deviating, we're not growing, we're just existing comfortably in the same thing that feels familiar. So our tendency, I think, is to fall into the south node, because sometimes when we're living, we just have to get through, we just have to survive, and that is our familiar territory. It's like the skills that we had, that we were born with. And if we want to evolve, if we want to grow, if we want to master this karmic lesson, we have to look to the opposite of that. We have to look to unfamiliar and just be bold enough to venture into it.
Yeah. In evolutionary astrology, the south node is viewed most often in its shadow state. So it's like, what is the karma that it's coming in with? I love that Maggie said it's the skills we bring in, because that is very much true. I see that more and more true the more that I study. I can see how the point is we want to move away from past life karma so that we don't repeat our past life karma. That's the whole story around this nodal story of south to north when we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, which is why you look at the shadow. So you can say, okay, well, what would be the dark side of Virgo south node? And then present how it is that you'd then want to move toward the north. That makes sense. However, also there are a lot of gifts because there's a familiarity there. One of my teachers talked about not only it being just this past life karma, like something that you are running from, but it's also something that you overdid. Like you went past mastery in your past lives on this. It was too much. So you're done with that. There's no point in staying with that now. It's now to evolve. We must move toward the North Node, or I also think of it as the North Star, just because we have that as a thing that we all know, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's fascinating, the whole thing. We haven't really used the terms evolutionary versus like psychological and predictive terms as far as astrology is concerned. But because I just brought it up, there's a million different versions of astrology. When we were talking about the house systems before, just like anything, there's like schools of thought and different whatever. But with evolutionary, the nodes play a huge role. So when you're looking at the chart as your soul's blueprint and what it's looking to evolve into and through in this life, the nodes play a very, very big part. And being a student of Stephen Forrest, who's a, you know, I don't know, I always call him one of the fathers of evolutionary astrology. He does 3-hour readings on only the nodes themselves, you know, and some of the other planets come in because, of course, there's aspects and whatever, but he tells a really crazy, like, detailed story about how important the nodes are. So I mentioned that just to say that they're important no matter what, but depending on the sort of school of thought or what you feel most drawn to, you might find that the nodes are going to be extremely important and maybe sometimes won't pack as much of a punch per se. When I say psychological astrology, we're talking about, oh, your Saturn is in Aries, and so you present this way. You're literally just looking at the human and saying, human, here's what I know about you just from looking at this. And you're just dealing with the psychological aspects of being a human and how this stuff presents through that psychescape. And then, you know, predictive astrology is looking at stuff that's going to happen in the future. And anyway, always so many tangents available to us. And I happen to be a master of tangents. So apologies if any of that's confusing, but when it feels relevant, I'm going to throw little things in there. It's how I roll. So I think we got everything. Yeah, we feel pretty good. Awesome. So thank you guys. That was class number 3 of the Celestial Essentials series. We've got coming up next week. Next class will be episode 4, which is the signs. Woohoo! We built this in a very particular order that we felt like really built in order. So we just did the what today. We're going to now get into that how. How do the signs present? And we'll or how do the planets present by the sign archetype. So we're going to get into all the zodiac signs. You're going to start to hear a lot more of this repetition so that you can start to make those relationships between, oh yeah, and so that sign and this element and that mode and blah, blah, blah. And we just keep intelligently layering the cake, if you will. What kind of
yum.
ice cream cake? My favorite. So good. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our sponsor, Luna. You rock and you're beautiful. Have you seen The Help, the movie The Help, or have you read that book?
I might have read the book a long time ago.
Oh my gosh, so good. One of the parts is one of the women who's watching one of these babies is telling her, she tells her every day, you is kind, you is smart, and you is beautiful. I'm pretty sure those are the 3. I'm like, I feel like I'm doting on Luna. We're just like, you is beautiful, Luna. Thank you for being beautiful. All right. And with that, on that note, we gotta go. We gotta get out of here. We'll see you next time. We are so grateful to you. And until then,
stay
curious.
Yay! I love the board.
I love the board of directors is something else.